Good morning.
Welcome, everyone.
Well, welcome everybody to Women in Action. This session, we're going to hear from Sally Fox from,
Vreseis.
Vreseis. I had it and then it left my mind. So from Vreseis Ltd, a little bit about Sally. Sally is the owner of Vreseis, and she is a pioneer in research and development of the naturally colored organic cotton. Sally developed the first organically bred and grown cotton in the US. And as an innovator, she's appeared on TV shows such as Good Morning America, ABC Tonight. She's been instrumental in forging a path for the sustainable textile movement that we see today. So we're going to hear from Sally in just a few minutes. But before we do, just want to go over a couple of etiquette rules. Kim, can you? Yep. So first, be kind to yourself and others. Aim to be the best version of yourself. Be thoughtful, responsible, and bring a positive energy to the discussions. Listen to learn with openness and curiosity, and remember to mute yourself when you're not talking. That's extremely important. There will be time for discussion at the end of the presentation, and we encourage everyone to respectfully share their questions, ideas, and opinions. But we want Sally to have plenty of time to do her presentation, so we'll just hold any questions for the end. And then we can acknowledge that women can and should make a difference in everyone's life at work. So I'm going to turn it over to Sally. So Sally, welcome to Women in Action. We're glad to have you today.
Thank you very much for the beautiful introduction. And I'll start with the share screen here. Let's see. Go with this. And hopefully everyone can see the screen. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us. I wanted to start with just a little bit of the past, where this all started, where I started with all of this. And in 1982, I was working for a cotton breeder, a very innovative cotton breeder who was in his late 70s at the time, and I was in my 20s. And in a greenhouse drawer was a bag of cotton seeds that were not, where the fiber was not white. It was a mix of color, mainly browns. And when I saw that bag of seed, I was very excited. And why I was so excited is a longer story. So I'll start with that. When I was young, I had older sisters, five older sisters, and they were all very cool. And I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and it was the summer of love and all this stuff. And there was something called a Renaissance fair that one of my sisters took me to, and somebody at the Renaissance fair had drop spindles. And I bought one, and I found the love of my life, which is spinning, hand spinning. And I decided this is it. This is what I want to do, is be a custom hand spinner. And while everyone else is doing all these wild things with psychedelic life in San Francisco, I'm sitting in a dog groomer's window with my spinning wheel, spinning people's dog hair. And I have this big idea. I'm going to support myself for the rest of my life as a custom hand spinner. So I was in high school with this big idea when I had an instrumental teacher, and her name was Dr. Elizabeth Wangari. She's way down on the bottom of the slide on the left. She was from Kenya, and she was the second woman from Kenya to be getting a PhD in any university in the United States. She got her PhD in ecology, went on to work for the UN, United Nations environmental program. Last I knew, she was in Dakar, Senegal. But she was my high school teacher, and she was teaching biology, and she encouraged me to give up the idea of being a custom hand spinner and go to college and study entomology and be part of the team of people that would reduce pesticide misuse. And along that line, she arranged for me to intern at a company that was very innovative in Palo Alto at the time. And this photo shows the person who funded the corporation, called Zoecon Corporation. On the right is Dr. Carl Gerasi. This is the lab, this is the insectary that I worked in. And this photo of Dr. Gerasi is taken about maybe 5 years before I worked there. But Dr. Gerasi made his money on the commercial. He was the chemist who commercialized the synthetic hormones used in birth control pills, and he made a fortune. And one of the things he did with his money was start this company that worked on insect hormones and insect pheromone research, which the entire sustainable agriculture world depends upon. These innovations from this man's funding of scientists to come and work on insect hormones and insect pheromones. So that's what I did. I got inspired to go into science by Dr. Wangari. After that, after I graduated, I went into the Peace Corps. I worked in West Africa on rice. Here's my Peace Corps volunteer card. But I kept spinning all the time. Spinning was my passion. And one of the ways I funded myself going through college, because I came from a family that didn't have the wherewithal to help, I worked. And one of the things I did was teach hand spinning. My favorite student was an older woman, but she had a sad story. Her daughter had become, her daughter was eventually died, but when I met her, her daughter was in a convalescent hospital in the process of dying. Her daughter had been a high school textile teacher. And this again is the 60s, and everybody's doing tie dyeing, and her daughter didn't use gloves. And the dyes got into her body through her hands and killed her brain. And her daughter eventually did die. And I'm at Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo, studying entomology, inspired by Dr. Wangari to be part of the team of educated professionals who will improve, specificity of chemical use in agriculture. And I hear this whole story about the dyes, and I'm thinking, well, who makes dyes anyway? And I go back into the library and I look in the books, and it's the companies that went on to become pesticide companies all started out as dye manufacturers. And then I started reading about dyes, and I got it into my head that no way was I ever going to have anything to do with dyes with all the things I do with my hand spinning, hand weaving. So here's a sweater that I spun and knit for my nephew. This is my nephew, and this is like 1980 or 78 or something. And the black in the little sweater is black wool from black sheep, and the camels are made out of actual camel hair that the San Francisco Zoo used to let me go collect and spin. Back then, there weren't it wasn't available, all these fibers. You had to go find them. And luckily for me, somebody at the zoo let me go pick all this camel hair out. But the point of all this is that I was totally involved with hand spinning, hand weaving, hand knitting with natural colors of natural fibers. And when I saw the brown cotton bag, I was so excited because finally there was some color in cotton, because all these other fibers have color, but cotton I didn't know had the capacity to be grown in color. So I asked the breeder, his name was Dr. Dennett, well, why aren't we the fiber in the bag of this cotton came from the USDA, and the USDA breeders had given it to all the commercial breeders as a source of insect and disease resistant cottons, and with the idea that regular breeders could get these qualities into the white cotton lines. But when I saw these cottons, what I wanted was those colors, but the fiber, in my opinion, was too short and too weak and too coarse. But that's my opinion. Everyone who spins has their own opinions about every fiber. It's not like just because I thought they were too short and too coarse and too weak, it doesn't mean they are. That's just what I thought. So I asked him, why don't we improve the fiber? And he said, well, there's no market for naturally colored cottons. And I said, why don't we make a market for naturally colored cottons? And he said, he started laughing and he said, why don't you make a market for naturally colored cottons and you can have this part of the greenhouse. So that's how it started. And this picture is me when I'm very young with a plot of one of my cottons that I was growing. And the deal is, in the very beginning, what I got from the breeder was a mix of colors. When I planted the seeds, what grew out were all different colors. They weren't, I didn't plant a brown seed and I got a brown cotton. I got tan, I got this, I got that. It was all mixed. And I had this enormous variability in plant type and architecture. This photo here shows you a plant that's probably 6.5 feet tall. Where I live, and to be viable in our producing part of the world, things have to be machine pickable, and a plant that's 6 feet tall is not machine pickable. So there were all sorts of agronomic considerations in the breeding that I had to address. In the very beginning, I approached this in 2 ways. And a lot of, if any of you all in the group are breeders, you know that there are two ways of breeding, classical plant breeding. One is just selecting year after year, better from a group that's pretty diverse. You just keep making selections and eventually you get a variety that is consistent and better in some way. But what most people do is introduce variability by making cross pollinations. And so you choosing the parents in your cross pollination is critical. And in my case, I was trying to improve the fiber quality. So I chose some of the longest staple and strongest and finest cottons I could find, which I'll go into at length. But in the beginning, I was breeding these cottons and growing them, and I did all the work supported by my job as a scientist. I stopped working for the breeder. I went and worked for the county of San Mateo as an insect trapper. Then I went to Kern County, worked on insect trapping there, because I was employed in integrated pest management. So I'm trapping insects, I'm counting nematodes, I'm doing all the things to do with agricultural pest management. Those were my jobs. And I used my money that I made from my jobs to fund this research. So I was always doing it on a shoestring. And one day out of nowhere, one of my friends from grad school sent me, a check for $1,000 out of nowhere. And I was so excited because I used the money to send my first fibers for testing at Texas Tech University. Because up until then, it was only other hand spinners that were helping me evaluate my cottons. As I shared with Kim before, I'm this person that loves every single cotton plant. I'm not very good at deciding which ones aren't good. I love every one of them for some reason. So I always depended upon other people and then later data to help me winnow it out, because nobody has the money to be spending and to be growing 100,000 plants, individual plants. You have to narrow it down to the best. And to do that, I needed the help. In the first iteration, before I had the money from my friend, it was other hand spinners. But then it became data. Here's a picture of my aunt, who I'm named after. Her name, she was a Mercy nun, sister of Mercy nun, her whole life. And her first name is Vreseis, and my middle name is Vreseis. And that's what I named the company after. But she was a real inspiring aunt to me. She was just wonderful. And this picture just shows some of the first yarns, a little bit out of order here. My best friend, who is a potter, who also made my letterhead. I'm working in San Diego at a biotech company, driving up to Kern County every single weekend. It was a 5-hour drive there, 5-hour drive back with the traffic. But I worked always growing my cottons, always on the weekends, getting going. With the help of the first data that I sent in for analysis, the lab at Texas Tech told me that they believed this cotton could be machine spun. And if I sent it to them, they could test it, which I did. And I'll go back. This is me picking the cotton for that test. It went to the lab. It was tested. We spun it. A mill in Japan heard that there was machine spinnable, naturally colored cotton, and they called me at my work, which by then I was working in Wasco, California, the San Joaquin Valley, running the quality control lab for a BT fermentation facility. They called me at my job and said, could you grow a bale of this green cotton for the coronation of the Emperor of Japan's one ceremonial garment for the coronation of the emperor that was to be taking place in 1989. They needed a bale of this green cotton that I had gotten green, brown and green, and I was doing the selection to get it up into a quantity that could be ginned commercially. And so I said yes, and that's where I'll go now back to this. I'm a little out of order. This is the label that my friend made with the original idea for the logo of Fox Fiber, and that's in katakana in the script that my next door neighbor, who was Japanese, wrote for me. And we put these on the bales, and this went on the bales to Japan, and one of them was used to make the garment. So that's what started my whole business. And eventually I was able to quit my jobs as a scientist and just dedicate myself to producing these cottons for mills, for textile mills. It was incidental that it was organically grown because my whole focus, these cottons are naturally pest resistant. The buyers didn't care that it was organic. I'm the one that cared that it was organic. And I got all this interest going with people to grow the cotton organically. This photo is of the variety that is named Coyote. It was the first of my brown varieties. It was a selection from the original, not a result of cross-pollination, just selecting. For uniformity, big machine pickable bowls. You can see anyone who has a picking machine wants a bowl like that, and uniform in color. And uniformity of color from region to region is highly important. You don't want the color to be, if you're a textile mill and you're going to be using this as a base of color, you want an intense color, and you want it to be consistent as possible year to year and from region to region. I got a break. This designer, Levi Strauss, decided this would be a really cool thing. They entered into a contract with me and growers in Lubbock, Texas area. I don't know if many of you remember, but the growers in the Lubbock, in the High Plains, used to own their own mill. They had a denim mill. The growers themselves own their own gins, and they also had a spinning and a weaving mill. And the mill made something like 90% of the denim that was sold in the US market. And so what we ended up doing is I ended up crafting a contract, a 3-year contract. I supplied the seeds to the co-op of growers, and the co-op of growers grew it, spun it, wove it, sold the fabric to Levi's, and Levi's made the jeans. And this went on for 3 years. This was in the early 90s. I also worked with the designer at LL Bean, and we came up with this. It took me years, but we came up with yarn designs that in this case, this sweater was less expensive than a dyed version of the same sweater. So even though the cost of the cotton was higher per acre because of all the fussiness of keeping the seeds separate, and the yields of these initial varieties were not the same as white cotton yields, even with extra 2 to 5 times the cost, the price of the final garment was equal to or less than if it had been dyed. And here's some of the growers from the Texas High Plains visiting my breeding farm. There were about 40 of these growers who were the co-op owners. They grew the cotton for Levi's, and we grew it at scale. And at scale, this made sense financially. seeds, just a quick note on the seeds. The fiber around the seeds of cotton can be used for paper. We made the first organic, naturally colored paper back then. And we also found that these naturally colored cotton fibers are antimicrobial. Cottonseed, before it gets sold to dairies, cottonseed is highly prized by dairy cattle industries because the cottonseed brings the butter fat up in the milk. But normal cottonseed is subject to a fungus and produces a toxin called aflatoxin, which everyone has to test for and make sure that it doesn't have too much aflatoxin because nobody wants their dairy cows getting sick. Well, we would store these piles of seeds and no aflatoxin would grow. And this was the first indication that not only are these cottons already bypassing color, the need to dye, but they're also antimicrobial. Later, we found out the browns are fire resistant, as fire resistant as wool. The other main part of my research and breeding has been cross-pollinating to create the diversity from which to select from. And I want to just briefly go through my breeding program as I've been doing it. And it's dependent upon the 2 species of cotton that were domesticated in the Americas, of which Gossypium hirsutum, the one on the left, is the one that probably 90% of the world grows. It's the fuzzy seeded cotton that is so hardy and so fantastic in so many ways. And it's the species that the colored cottons that I began with that were collected by the USDA and given to the breeders. It's where the color comes from in my breeding program. There are naturally colored cottons of every species of cotton domesticated. I'm just describing my work, not anybody else's. So my color began as Gossypium hirsutum, which is you see the flower on the left. On the first day, it's yellow, and then it closes up, and then there's the little cotton ball. On the right is Gossypium barbadense. Barbadense is the species also domesticated in the Americas, more or less in where Peru is now, at least 8,000 years ago. It has the smooth seed. It's known for sort of a higher quality fiber, and that's why I used it. The names that you would know would be Pima and the Egyptian cottons and Sea Island cottons. They have a smooth seed. If you're ginning this by hand, this is the kind of cotton you really want. You don't want the fuzzy seed one because it's too hard to gin by hand. But the extreme length and strength comes from, and also if you're a designer and you're looking at fiber, the Gossypium hirsutums, the fuzzy seeded ones, are kind of like back in the days when we did, when we went into a dark room to do our photos, we had glossy paper and matte paper. Well, the hirsutum is like a matte paper. It's not shiny. When you dye it, it's a flat color. The barbadense is sheen. It's like silk. It has this refractive element to the outside. And in my breeding, I was trying to amplify the color. So I wanted that refractive quality in my color. And that's the other reason I use this. So I'm going to briefly show you how you make a cross-pollination. You start with a flower and you go ahead and cut the flower open to reveal the pollen at the bottom. The stigma is the female part sticking up at the top. You take the pollen out, leaving the stigma. Can you see in this picture on the bottom, you can see all the pollen's gone. I have on the left is a flower that I'm using as the father in this cross. The mother in this case is a Pima. Here are flowers I'm collecting for the fathers. I still make hundreds of crosses. I used to, in my youth, be able to make about 1,200 crosses a season, but I was much more spry then. I could get up and down, and it's hard to do these crosses. And I'm all happy now if I can do 15 in a day instead of 50. I used to do 60 in a day when I was young. Now I can do 15. But anyway, here's a picture of me making a cross in 1986 at the greenhouse of the company I worked at in San Diego that used to, they gave all the big wigs stock options, and they gave me, I designed the greenhouse and had it built. And for thanks, I got space in the greenhouse for my cotton. They were all, everywhere I've worked, I've had great bosses, and they always believed in this project and always encouraged me to not give up and to keep going. So I'm an unusual entrepreneur, and that a lot of people who can call themselves entrepreneurs didn't love their work before, but I loved every job I had, and I still count as treasured friends my old bosses. I love them, and they helped me so much. First of all, I learned so much from them, but they also just were so always encouraging to me. I benefited from great work, great people that I've worked with. So here is a cross that I made. And after you make the cross, you put a little bag over it because you don't want any bees getting in and bringing pollen you didn't know or want. Here's some, I'm just quickly going to go through this. On the left is the barbadense, in this case, the mother. On the right is the green cotton with an unusual flower as the father, and the child is this in the middle. Can you see how it has elements of both flowers? I'm showing flowers instead of lint because the lint is hard to, it's not easy for me to photograph the diversity of the lint, but I think you can see the effect in the flower. Here's just, I'm trying to keep in my time, so I'm not going to go on and on. I'm just showing various steps in the cross-pollination process, keeping track of the little bags, keeping track of which ones you did. In this picture, I have a little tag that's a little, the tag is what I made when I made the cross. And now in this picture, the bowl is open at the top. Those seeds are F1 seeds, and you plant them in little plots. Perhaps you can see that there are plots here, normal little plots that you plant the F1s in. Maybe it might be 6 plants, and you grow them up and you save the seed from them and grow them in the next year in a plot. And you do this year after year, decade after decade, and eventually you get, if you keep making selections and keep using either hand spinners, or in my case, I became to be completely dependent upon the data. I use the data from the fiber analysis and the weighing and all the stuff, the data I collect on each individual plant to select the ones I'm going to go forward with. And so decade after decade, I use plants instead of I use a stake to stake what the plot, it gets a number and it gets a plot, but I also use other plants because one year some kids, I had planted over 600 plots with little sticks, and some kids came in and as a prank pulled all the sticks out. And I came out to my nursery, and luckily they hadn't killed any plants. They just pulled all the sticks out. And luckily I had a map of my plots. But that year I learned, don't rely on only sticks, plant something in between each plot. And this was the year I was using sunflowers. Sometimes I use sorghum. Sometimes I use black-eyed peas. There's some sorghum in the background there. I use different plants to separate my plots because if it happened once, it'll happen again. Somebody's going to come and pull the sticks out. So here, plots, I started this work in 1982, and this is my nursery from last year in 2022. So, I've been at this a while. Here on the left is a plot that's pretty consistent. On the right where the tractor is, that is a plot where the plants are pretty consistent, at least the way the plants look. To get a variety, it can't only be how the plants look, it has to be that the fiber has to be consistent. And that's where the fiber analysis comes in. And briefly, I will show you some pretty pictures of the variability of the flower types in my breeding program. And it's a little more variable than what most people have in their breeding, but I think it's very pretty and I like to share it because I think it shows what variability is possible in cotton with just normal plant breeding. This is classical old-fashioned plant breeding that's acceptable for organic standards.
I haven't had access to the money to do any of the genetic testing, which I would love to be able to do. Could speed this up tremendously if I had the money to test the genetics. But this is what I have. I work with what I have, and I don't. If I sit around wondering what would have happened, I would get nowhere. I have to just keep my head to the nose to the grindstone and keep working. The bowl's open and you get all these colors. I'm going to quickly go through showing you variability in color of the fiber and length, and then I'll go into the analysis. I'm trying to keep in my time period here and not go beyond. There are all sorts of issues. Where on the fiber is the color? How much color is expressed? How long is the fiber here? White, there, even in white cottons, there's a lot of variation in length. This is a Sea Island cotton, really long Sea Island. I still use the Barbadense, the Sea Island or Pima to cross with my most intense colors. I still am learning how color is expressed. I've been working hard at getting varieties developed that amplify the color. This is a photo of my friend and helper, Sierra, who I named one of the varieties after her because it's even darker than her ginger hair. So in the beginning, by the late 80s, I'd come up with this system of breeder cards where I write on, you'll see there's numbers. I write at the top, it's green control. And you can see maybe that the length is 0.98 under L, you'll see 0.980. Well, that's almost an inch. And that was my first green. And there's in the middle is a piece of boiled yarn. And that comes from the days that the hand spinners were spinning my cotton, my different lines, and they would spin and boil the cotton. And back in the early 80s, that some of the cottons, when you boil them, the color goes away, and some of them, the cotton gets darker. So this was my initial, more important to me than any other quality is what happens to the color when you boil it or wash it. And I test every single selected plant. I spin a bit of it and boil it and put it on the card with the fiber quality. So if you see the next card down, if you look at L, you'll see it's 1.19. So that's better. If you look at S, strength, this is grams per text. The S on the green control is 17, which is like abysmally bad. And the strength on this second one here is 26, not great, but way better than what I started with. And the color is darker. The length is longer, the color is darker, and the strength is better. So it's just, this is what you expect with normal plant breeding, is to improve things. It takes time. And one lifetime, one person, one lifetime doing this on their own is quite amazing, the progress I've been able to make. If it had been a team of people, it would have been, we will make someday much more progress, but this is an example of where I was in 1993. I used to have thousands of these cards and pick the best 100 or 200. And those were the ones I would grow. And then those were the ones I select from. So decades of this work to get the kind of, this is just from last year. Still making progress, still my system is the same. I just keep at it. The point of all this is after I get the slide's a little funny, on the top right left is the coyote, my first brown. To the right at the top is a brown line. I don't know why we can't see this very well. I'm sorry about that, but it's a brown that is an advanced line. It's significantly darker and significantly better in fiber quality. On the bottom are two greens, the green control and an advanced green with much better fiber quality. And these are to the point where there are enough of them to be a plot to be considered a variety to go forward with. The one on the right, the lower right, became my sea green line that I produced for the mill in Japan. Here's, oh, this one's better. Okay. after I always have the unwashed on the bottom right, you can see unwashed of this 805699, unwashed and then washed. The washing allows the color to develop, and that's the critical thing. My first varieties, in this case, Coyote was my first, Buffalo was my Pima Brown. They stay more or less, they get a little bit darker. It's not dramatic. It's as I have been breeding these, I've been breeding for greater intensification of color in laundering. I think that's a really important thing. Other breeders with their programs may not think it's important. I'm just this person that likes to get my clothes out of the washing machine and they look better. I think this is a big sales thing, but not everybody has this idea. This is my idea. And that's why you have all different people doing breeding, right? People have different ideas. This is my idea. I started doing textile research at Texas Tech in the 80s. These are some of the first fabrics that I had produced. I paid to produce them with the income from the production crop. So the first 10 years of my research were funded by my lab jobs. The second 10 years of my research were funded by sales of the cotton to mills. And this is the period I made the most progress. Each one of these fabrics would cost $10,000 to $20,000 to produce. And I would pay this and have these produced and then do the wash studies. Everything so that my customers, if they bought it, I could give them the package. This is how you spin this yarn. This is the recipe. This will last how many washes? You know, I did all that work so that people had a product that they could market. These were ring spun yarns. The one on the bottom right is the sheeting fabric that I ended up designing and getting in. That ended up being 500,000 pounds of that yarn design. And I still am sleeping on sheets from those from 30 years ago. They haven't broken, they haven't worn out. That's how good design can make something that lasts a long time. Okay. Then in addition to washing, there are all these things that have yet to be really explored. One of the things I've been playing with is natural dye mordants, because I know a lot of you know that there's a lot of interest in natural dyes. And because of that, the finishing facilities have access to some of the common natural dye mordants. Mordant means to bite, mordant. That's the Latin is to bite. And that means that's what helps the dye stick to the fiber. In this case, on the top is my green raw. On the bottom is the green put through the iron mordant used by natural dyers. And on the left is the brown put in that same mordant. And this is just the beginning of all. We don't even know where we're going on all these things. This fabric on the left is this a jacquard knit, unwashed, and on the right, the same knit washed. And you can see how the color intensifies just one laundering. And there's a larger version of it. Then there's natural dyeing of the naturally colored cottons. This is a photo, a close-up of my yarns that were spun in Japan, a particular way, particular design, dyed with indigo, natural indigo, for this exhibition at the Seattle Art Museum. And what these things that look white are not white, they're my color. And you can see in the closer up version, and the indigo that's dyed over it has a look that's distinct and different than if it had been white cotton. Here's a situation where my customer in Japan used an indigo dyed, natural indigo warp, and then my cotton as the weft. So the naturally colored cottons require an absolute connection between the farmer and the spinner and me, or the breeder, because this is all the art, all the design is happening at the spinning mill and not later down the road. And the spinner in this case, on the left, the spinner is Dr. Kondo from Taisho Boseki, who has retired, but he is a genius spinner. He's holding the organic Sea Island cotton grown by Dosi Alvarez on the right. And I'm in the middle because I'm the merchant of this, but also he grows my color. All of my naturally colored cotton is produced in New Mexico. Here was our agent. He'd gone on to something else, but he was a Itoshu Nakamura-san. And there's a field of my coyote that was going to be ginned. Here it is being ginned. And then here's the bale. Okay. And then I sell the bales. I have bales. I have seeds. I can produce it. So where is the world? Here's my trademark. My friend that did the original artwork she made this, and she came up with the name. I didn't like the name, but by the time she said it, then my mother and father got all excited. Oh, this is such a good name, and that everybody liked it except me. And then I came up with the color organic part at the bottom, but it stuck. And this cotton received a lot of awards. Here's the award from 1993 from the United Nations. And here's the IFOAM, which is the International Federation of Organic Agricultural Movements from 1993. My work began the entire conversation in the United States of organic cotton. And why that happened is because the cottons were naturally insect and disease resistant. And it was my personal thing. When these companies ordered cotton from me, they didn't specify it had to be organic. I'm the one that wanted it organic. And I'm telling the story of all this on social media. There's one post a day on Instagram now. You can go back, they have numbers, and you can read them when you have time to spare, which nobody ever has time to spare. But some of my younger customers have been asking me to write a book, and I'm using this exercise of all these social media posts to get the material into a form that somebody good at writing can take and turn it into a book. And there's this science writer who I like her writing a lot, and she approached me and said that she'd help me. So once a week, I'm spending about 8 hours putting these posts together for the week on Instagram, but I'm also really putting them together for her so she can help turn them into something that's appropriate for printed media, because this is a skill this is not a skill I have. I feel like I'm okay at telling the story, but writing it is another thing. So I need her help. So that's what's going on. I fund my research now with selling to hand spinners, hand weavers, hand knitters. This is stuff I sell. This is every day. I'm at the post office shipping product out. I make yarns. I have yarns made. I have fabrics made. What I'm wearing is a shirt that's made out of a fabric was grown in New Mexico. You saw the farmer there, Dosi. It was spun. Dosi Alvarez grew it. It was spun at Taisho Boseki in Japan. It was woven at Tobo Textiles in Japan. And I bought the whole work, 1,200 meters, shipped it to my farm. I have it in my shipping container, and I sell it by the roll to wholesale people, like the woman who made this. She has a shop in Oakland, and I bought this shirt from her after she bought the fabric from me. And then also I sell it retail by the yard. And I'm at the post office every day, shipping products to the people who believe in this, because still there are no foundations or anybody supporting my work. It's only us. It's just us. All the people who believe in it are the ones, they buy it, and that's how they're supporting it. I have a farm. That's another story. You can read all about it, but I have sheep too, colored sheep. These are my merino, black, brown, and white merino sheep. I have this big dream. I have 30 bales of their wool in color that I hope someday to do a Viella, the old Viella fabric, which was 40% wool, 60% cotton. I want to do it with my colors and their colors together. We'll see. And then I also help revive an heirloom wheat. Here I am standing in my wheat field. This wheat, all of this, the sheep and the wheat are part of the rotation that are building the soil. I put my breeding nursery on a different part of my farm every year, and I'm continually building the soil up. So I have a certified organic farm, and it's also biodynamic, which is even more fanatical, but that means you don't bring outside. The biodynamic thing is you don't bring outside materials on your farm. You have your own animals, you grow their own food, and that's the source of fertility, is what you have on your farm. You don't bring a bunch of outside materials in, which is interesting to me. And that's what I've been playing with for 25 years on this farm. And that's it. I think I'm right on time. So let me not share the screen anymore. Let's see, how do I do that?
Sally, that was just fascinating. The journey that you've been on, and the what you've accomplished over the years, and how that really kind of feeds into, you know, a lot of the sustainable practices that we're talking about in today's world, with especially around some of the regenerative agriculture. You know, you've really been focusing on things before it was cool to focus on. So very fascinating. I'd like to open it up and see if anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask Sally.
And you got rid of my screen. I'm not, did you
Good.
get, okay, good. I'm done.
Kim took care of it. So
yay, thank you, Kim. Okay.
any questions? So one question that I do have, so you're a certified organic farmer, right? Have you found that, so what's your take on a lot of these new processes that are coming back from that have been used, you know, in the past, right? So a lot of the regenerative agriculture practices where the focus is on the soil health. How do you feel about those?
Well, I feel like organic was the original. That's where did they even come up with the name organic, right? I used to wonder, because I came to organic agriculture from, whoops, there's my timer telling me to stop. I came to organic from the pest management part, right? I was so focused on insect pests, controlling them, pheromones, insect hormones, all this stuff, right? I came to organic that way. And what I found was that organic was more about finding a way to pay for the non-chemical soil amendments. So why did they even call it organic? It's because it's non-synthetic nitrogen, building the soil up. And the founders of the organic movement were all these soil scientists in the 1910, 1920, who were observing 1930s, who observed the soil microbiome decimation when they first started using synthetic nitrogen, which was exciting synthetic nitrogen. You put it on and you got massive yield increases, but the soil started suffering. And these original soil scientists were so worried about this that they advocated going back to all these methods of composting and manures and green manures and cover cropping and all those things. Those were the basis of their whole system that later began to be called organic, because they observed that the synthetic nitrogens were having this damaging effect on the soil microbiome. So when I came into organic, the people who were already doing it they were using natural forms of nitrogen, which cost 10 times more than synthetic. So how do you pay for this soil building that all these farmers are doing? And they had come up with this whole system of a certification of, oh, it's organic. We give it a label. And then that way you can charge more because it costs so much more. So when you ask this question about the focus lately on regenerative, what I see regenerative is a sort of it's sort of the first step towards organic, where people are going, oh yeah, we need to look at our soil. Oh, we're learning about how important the soil is. And in the case of the regenerative, because they don't have a market that pays for all this extra input, they're reliant upon government grants. And in the United States, there are all these grants and all this funding for people to try putting a cover crop in. In my state of California, we have this healthy soils program, and they pay for the cover crop seeds and all this stuff. So you, the farmer, aren't the one who has to come up with all this money to buy these expensive inputs. But with the certified organic, it was the customer that was paying for all these expenses through the higher cost of the product. So it's kind of like the organic is the pure and the regenerative is going that direction and allowing people to explore looking at their farms in a different way without the need for being so purist. Maybe that's my take on it. What about you? Do you have a feeling about that?
You know, I've got another question for you. How about that?
Okay.
So the question comes from Linda. What do you see for the future of your product line?
Well, I think it's finally going to start taking off again, because what happened was we had this metamorphosis of the textile processing industry. When I first started and I had all those customers and we were up to thousands of acres of production, and LL Bean and Levi's and all these guys, that was when we had textile spinning mills and weaving and knitting in the United States and in Europe and Japan, where everyone had to clean their dye waste up. By the late 90s, all the big brands had switched to buying from the parts of the world where people were dumping their dye waste and you didn't have to clean it up. And just to give you an idea, the cost of dyeing back then was about $1 a pound for the dyeing process per pound of yarn, of say cotton yarn, but it was $2 to $3 a pound to clean up the waste. So when the brands went to all these places where they're dumping the dye waste, everything was way cheaper, except for the people downriver from the dye facilities. It wasn't cheaper for them. They suffered being polluted. And all the mills that I was selling to 48 mills. By the time we were up to thousands of acres, every one of them went out of business. Everyone.
They couldn't compete, right?
How can you compete with people dumping dyes in the rivers? You can't.
Yeah.
And we can't have dyes in our rivers. So now what's happening is the whole world is fed up with this dyes in the river thing. And everybody has to clean up their dye waste. Once we're at that level, we can start having spinning and processing back in the US, Europe, and Japan. Those were the main places that textiles used to be made for our own markets. We used to make the textiles closer to where they were sold. Once that happens, there's a place for spinners to do this kind of innovative work. And that's who my market is. My market, people who would buy these cottons are spinners that are highly artistic and technically competent. That an answer?
Yeah, that's great. Got another question for you. This is from Fabiana. Sally, how do you see the negative impact on the soil health of tillage in organic crop management?
I think that is slander on the no-till people. I think it's completely crazy stuff. Sorry. I have, this is where I put my foot down. So if you are using mechanical means of controlling weeds, which is what organic farms tend to do, we do not have tools of herbicides. If you don't have the tool of an herbicide, what you have is the tool of a knife or something going through and cutting the weeds out. I've looked at the studies that people keep sharing and they're ridiculous. They compare this completely deep tillage like ripping or something where you have a tool that's going down 3 feet. They compare that with taking the weeds off of the top 2 inches, as though microbes are affected by a knife going through the soil. So I am a person that is very frustrated at this kind of divisive language. I don't think that there is an element of the regenerative group that starts picking on organic as not being regenerative enough or something. And I find these sorts of conversations to not bring us where we need to go. I feel like we have a short window of time and what we all need to do is encourage each other to do the best we can in our circumstances to sequester as much carbon as we can, in a way that keeps us in business. And everyone has different markets and different things. Let's all be kind to each other and support each other, and not say mine is better than yours, or this is worse. And I personally don't think we have time for that kind of stuff, and I don't like it. So anyway, that's my answer. Sorry, I'm all prickly about it.
All right. One last question, and this comes from Amy. And she loves your story. You mentioned it was cost effective, if not to make more of the LL Bean sweaters with organic colored cotton versus dyed cotton. What is the cost disparity now? You touched on it based, the onshore offshoring. Is it something that could be cheaper in the future?
It's sure, if it went into, first of all, it's extremely expensive right now, because right now I have these tiny fields and I have to send it, like in the United States, for the sheets for American Blossom linens and the socks that I sell on my website. I ship it to this a startup in North Carolina, and they cart it for me, and it costs a good 8 times what regular cotton costs to cart. Everything. You ship one bale, it costs as much as shipping a container of bales.
Yeah.
You shippers know this, right?
We do.
And so we have this trouble right now. The cotton as it is now is unbelievably expensive, because it's just me, and I don't have some bunch of Uber, or I don't have a bunch of stockholders that hold the price. I have to charge what it costs. And this is the most inefficient way possible. But in the past, when I was selling to LL Bean and all those guys, it was in the thousands of acres of production, and we were able to produce and design yarns that were less expensive than dyed versions. And so it's a matter of blending the color with white cotton to get the colors you want. This shirt I'm wearing, this is the darkest color in this, is 50% color, 50% white. So you don't use the color 100%. Well, you could if you wanted to, but you don't have to. This is kind of a lot of color for that. The LL Bean sweater that you saw used mostly 17% color in blends, and then some 50% colors. But that's where the designer comes in. This requires design.
Yeah. Well, Sally, I think we could ask you questions all day. We are at time, and so we do really appreciate you joining us. Kim, can you put up that last slide so we can remind everyone?
Certainly, but before we go, Sally, again, thank you very much. Could you please share either verbally or in the chat the best way to contact you in case people would like to continue the conversation?
Okay, I'm going to give you my email address, Vreseis@icloud.com. And then I have a website, which I did it wrong. VRESEIS at iCloud. Sorry. That's it. And then my website is Vreseis.com. If you Google Sally Fox, it'll bring you to Vreseis.com. So thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. So we've got another Chat for Change coming up in about 6 weeks. We're still confirming the date. This next chat will be with Dr. Salma Rahim from the University of Liverpool, and her studies focus on multiculturalism, leadership, and inclusion. So I hope to see you at the next Chat for Change. Again, Sally, thank you so much for your time today. It's been, a wonderful story to learn from and very inspirational. And thanks everybody for joining. See you next time.
Thank you. Thank you, Sally.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, bye.
Bye.